Hello, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to all of you watching this RTS London virtual event from wherever you are, whether that's your home office, your kitchen, your baby's nursery. I've seen a bit of that recently. Get your peace and quiet where you can. I'm Abby Robinson, TV writer at Digital Spy, and today I'm going to be probing the minds of three esteemed TV experts about whether there's just too much television currently on offer. There's certainly more than ever before, but is that cause for celebration, and what does it mean? So let's introduce today's panel.
Hey, my name is Minori Ravindran, and I'm international editor for Variety, based out of London. I oversee news for Variety outside of the US.
Hi there, I'm Frances Taylor. I'm streaming editor of Radio Times magazine, looking after all of our on-demand content.
Hello, I'm Nigel Wally. I'm Managing Director of media consultancy Decipher. We're based in London, and we look very closely at consumer behaviour change around digital media, and particularly changes in TV consumption patterns. So this debate is core to our favourite subject.
Hello to all of you. Great to have you here. So we have about 50 to 55 minutes-ish to delve into this topic. It's a big old topic. There's a lot to get through. I should say that you can submit your own questions too, and I'll do my best to get to those. So let's get started and kick off with the big one. Is there too much television? We've all done that thing where we sign into Netflix, fully intending to watch something. We spend about 20 minutes browsing, and then we just close our laptops and don't end up watching anything at all. So with that in mind, Minori, is there just too much right now?
I mean, there's definitely an awful lot, but I don't know. I'm personally not really convinced that it's ever really been. I mean, I think really the question is there too much, perhaps, good TV? Because there's always been a lot of TV, but ultimately, when we're thinking about too much TV, it's really that sort of high-end premium sort of level that we're really, that's coming into the equation here. I personally don't think that too much TV really is a thing, because I feel as though at this point there's so many players in the market that there is enough to go around. And also when you think about international series, sometimes we're so focused on the US and US programming, but when you consider international television, it's an awful lot, and plenty to share, and which I'm happy to delve into a little bit. But I don't personally think that there is too much.
Nigel, do you feel overwhelmed by the amount of TV that's on offer? Reading, a few features recently, the overwhelming consensus seems to be we're tired. Stop it. Slow down. Do you feel that way?
I'm slightly aware of the whole tyranny of choice thing. I think we should probably get that debate out on the table early on in this. There's that famous bit of consumer research that showed if you offer 6 brands of jam in a supermarket, people buy more than if you offer 26 brands of jam, because people are kind of overwhelmed by the choice. And so that phrase tyranny of choice came out of that kind of consumer research. And you can argue that we're in that situation with TV. However, you come back to the question about what counts as TV, because one of the things that's going on in this strange new world is we're seeing some weird shifts. So there's most definitely been a shift from audience viewing through to single viewing over the last 10 years, since the real arrival of VOD. And so you could argue that the consumption of video on your own through a personal device isn't necessarily TV. So picking up on kind of the earlier comment about is there enough quality TV, I think we do need to factor into this debate a kind of a shift away from shared audience, broadcast, big event television to single person, single user consumption of video in personal devices. And I'm not sure that necessarily threatens the TV world. I mean, I see no problem with managing the volume we have at the moment. I think probably the more difficult thing is curation, that we probably haven't yet as an industry adapted the way we curate, we recommend, we present, and we offer selections. And probably it's the curation that has to catch up in a world of infinite supply.
Yeah, we're going to dig into the curation, as you say, a little bit later on. Frances, we've just said that, there's loads to watch. We've established that. We're not lacking in terms of options, but obviously there's quality and quantity, which are two very different entities. is the vast majority of what's on offer at the moment mediocre at best, terrible at worst, with a handful of standouts like I May Destroy You, It's a Sin thrown in for good measure? How do you feel about what's on offer, the quality?
Yeah, well, I think, I can only echo so far as well what fellow panelists were saying, is that I think people have been saying for a while now, that we're about to reach peak TV, that, we can't take another streaming service, we can't take another, the golden age of telly that we're in is about to burst. And I just don't see that happening. I think COVID, actually, the crisis that we're in, it's fired up people to, obviously we're all in a lot longer, we're in all the time. It's fired up people's appetites for even more TV. But I agree, quantity versus quality. We're not short on quantity, obviously, as you say. Just to look at Netflix, there's thousands and thousands of shows up there, and at any one time, Netflix has global productions all around the world, hundreds of TV shows being made. And do you know what? We've got to put our hands up and say, yes, not everything out there is good. It kind of can't be. Not everything can have the budget of Stranger Things or The Crown. There's going to be some duffers in there. And I think, Netflix model as well is to kind of flood the market. Really, you only need one or two, a handful every quarter, every year of shows to be really big hits and to have that word of mouth spread. But yes, I think we can all say that not everything we've seen, especially on streaming service, is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dig into the Netflix model a little bit later on, because the way that they operate is contentious among some people, to say the least. Minori, how do you feel about the caliber of show that's on offer at the moment? Do you think it's outweighed by a lot of fairly mediocre stuff that's okay? It's pretty mindless. It'll distract us during lockdown, but it's not necessarily top of the tree.
Do you mean in terms of Netflix or in general?
In general, in terms of what we're seeing across all streamers and broadcasters, in terms of the quality.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, when you look at the sort of the Golden Globe nominations, for example, and you see, I know obviously there's been much discussion about it, but something like Emily in Paris, obviously, getting that kudos and not I May Destroy You. I do think that there's been a little bit of a race to the bottom in some senses, in terms of what people are flocking to, and what becomes a meme and what becomes a hit, so to speak, and during COVID times. I think everyone's stuck at home, and I'm seeing certain things kind of play really well that I maybe wouldn't have necessarily previously, like seeing something like The Undoing, where I felt I found myself like completely engaged in that show. And when you really kind of stand back and look at it, it's kind of like a very straightforward sort of this crime drama that obviously had amazing talent in terms of Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman. But I was just salacious program that I was just hooked on, and I kind of had to as more distance has been placed between when that aired and myself, I kind of looked at myself and thought, wow, is this really I was like obsessed, like what's wrong with me? Is that really the the kind of thing that I'm going to go for? And I realized that there is a COVID effect that we have to kind of take into account here, where people are just at home, our worlds are completely different. And so I think it's definitely changing tastes as well. I've been watching, to be perfectly honest, in terms of what I've been watching since New Year's Day, it's Mad Men, which I hadn't seen before, and somehow I hope I still have my job at Variety after this, but I hadn't seen it before. Been going through all of the seasons, and I have to ask myself if I would see something like that on TV now, which probably warrants another conversation about the state of the American sort of cable networks and premium cable. But yeah, I mean, I've not yet seen anything necessarily of that tier coming out during this period. And perhaps sadly, because of the effects on production, maybe that will impact, the quality of things that we see going forward. We'll have to see. It's very much a changing process. But to answer your question, I do think that our tastes are different in COVID times, and yes, I think the standards are changing a little bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. My tolerance for things which aren't as critically acclaimed has certainly increased over the past year, that's for sure. So obviously, when you're deciding what to watch, you have all these options available to you. And say you haven't gotten round to watching a show that everyone's been talking about, The Undoing, for example, you finally decide after work, right, I'm going to sit down, grab a cup of tea, get my hobnobs and enjoy it. You log on to Now TV and it's disappeared. It's gone. It's surpassed that period. Or perhaps there's another show that, you know, you want to watch the first season of, you watch it on one platform and then you realise that the second season isn't there. How do viewers find what to watch when seasons are split across platforms? How do they manage that ongoing struggle, Nigel?
Well, I think, if I may just offer one observation before answering that comment, and I'm clearly I'm at least double the age of everyone else on the panel here, so I still define TV very much as live sport, live news, daytime television, as well as box sets. And I do think there's a tendency sometimes when we talk about these trends like this, just to define television as on-demand box sets. So, you know, I'm if you're looking at me, what do I think is great TV? I'm watching live Six Nations rugby at the moment. So if you're asking me to define a changing TV experience, I have to put in all those other things. We can't forget the fact that people are still absolutely consuming soaps every day, which may not fall under the framework of quality TV. So I would like just to fly the flag for live, linear, scheduled broadcast television within this debate, and not just focus on the on-demand. But having said that, to answer your question, we are looking at the evolution of search and recommendations and interface at the moment, which is really interesting. And if we look at the quality of interface in a big pay TV platform like Sky Q, we've seen this week the expansion of voice search, expansion recommendations to include the constituent apps in the interface. So at the top end of the industry, there's a huge amount of investment in curation and presentation, and a lot of that has been driven by the incomers. So the quality of interface that we saw very early on with Netflix, and then more recently with Amazon Prime and the Amazon Fire OS, for instance, they have really given the whole of the television industry a kick and a drive to kind of innovate, because they brought with them a new quality of presentation and recommendation that we hadn't really seen from the old, what our American cousins would call, you know, the cable platforms. We would call the pay TV platforms over here. So without doubt, there's been a surge in presentation, recommendation, and search quality within the TV space. Still lots to do. I mean, the issue you raised about having series split across 3 providers is more of a distribution and a deals issue than a tech or a TV industry issue. And some of that, we see that coming through consumer research. Consumers hate it when they find themselves in that situation. So better quality search and recommendations that allow people to find those things will be I think probably the next wave of tech innovation we need to see.
And thinking about the shows that have cut through the noise at the moment, how does a show become a hit in this era of peak TV? So thinking about a show that I watched recently, The End, which aired at the beginning of last year on Sky Atlantic, completely passed me by. Watched it about a month ago, absolutely loved it. And I thought, hang on a minute, why didn't I hear about this? So obviously quality doesn't always equal exposure. Things can fly under the radar. So how does a show become a hit? What is a hit? Is it ratings? Is it quality? Is it a bit of both?
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to correlate to spend either. You know, but I think we can all come up with an example of a really expensive show which bombed and a really cheap show which hit the heights. So you would like to think there is some kind of correlation between spend and likelihood of success, but as I say, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. Sometimes relevance. So a show that's on at the moment, It's a Sin, hugely relevant in terms of the pandemic we're currently experiencing, reflecting back on a terrible pandemic in the 80s. Hugely relevant in terms of its how a pandemic can hit subgroups. And so that as a TV show, apart from the fact, absolutely top writing, brilliant TV making that went into it. Sometimes a theme just catches people's imagination. It's very hard to plan for, which is why TV is still such a hits business and not a science.
I do agree.
Fran,
in terms of the... Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I think so much of it as well is word of mouth. It's social media, it's Twitter, it's Instagram, it's Reddit, it's shows like Bridgerton, for example, and even normal people actually, where, you know, Instagram accounts are springing up for, you know, like the Duke of Hastings spoon, for example, things like that. It's people cottoning on to a clip, a meme, something like that, spreading. And it's just generally word of mouth. You know, if your friends are really into something and they tell you about it, you're going to probably be more likely to give it a go because you trust their opinion, they're in your social group, all that kind of thing. But I think in terms of how the shows are made as well, I think what's really interesting is that because there's so much choice out there, because, you know, as you say, you go on Netflix and you can spend 20 minutes scrolling, you need to hook people in the first 10 minutes. You know, you take a show like Tiger King, for example, the first bit of that show, there was so much in there and there's so much intrigue and strange stuff going on that you thought, well, I just have to see how this plays out. So it's a bit, I kind of liken it a little bit to what's happened with music and Spotify and streaming. You know, songs, you've got to have a hook. You've got to kind of get people to stop them skipping. And I really think that that's what we're seeing in TV as well.
And just to sort of, in terms of what Francis was saying around word of mouth, I think something that really drives word of mouth is, and this is why obviously crime is so popular, and we see that in terms of, you know, documentaries, but also drama like The Serpent, where, you know, you've got this really engaging, true story underpinning this brilliantly made drama. Where, you know, it's just captivating, and people, you know, immediately are you know, I find myself sort of Googling as I'm even watching the show, just to see, oh my gosh, is this, you know, who are the real people behind this amazing sordid crime story. So I do think also, Nigel, you touched on this too, but with It's a Sin, I find sort of social issue driven drama, hate to be so sort of categorize things in this way, but even if you look at I May Destroy You, which is obviously talking about, you know, this brilliantly told story about sexual assault and being a survivor, and I feel as though there's sometimes a wider impact story that sort of helps with marketing as well, not to be so forensic in kind of analyzing that show's success, but when certain dramas are pegged to specific social issues and topicality in that way, it does actually help that word of mouth, you know, especially around certain demographics. So I think subject matter is very relevant to this question.
Yeah, you can't escape.
Sorry, carry on, Nigel.
You can't escape the allure of crime. We just watched the Pembrokeshire murders on demand on ITV. So, you know, just a great, very classic, traditional procedural crime drama. You know, that's a timeless format. It wins out every time. And even though most of us actually knew the outcome because of the press coverage, and it did make me wonder whether in this world where you've got a broadcaster able to build narrative and discussion on social media beforehand, whether they theoretically are kind of better positioned to build something up. I was trying to work out, would the Pembrokeshire murders have done so well had it just been dropped into a big bucket like Netflix or Amazon Prime, or was there something about the fact that it came out with a related broadcast channel that made it easier for them to build the narrative that Minoria was talking about, and that kind of social media discussion. So I wonder whether the assets that sit in Netflix and Prime have to work so much harder because they don't have that benefit of national dialogue being built on a broadcast channel.
Yeah, all three of you have mentioned some fantastic shows there. I May Destroy You, It's a Sin, the Pembrokeshire murders, Minori and Francis as TV critics and journalists. Is it difficult to stay abreast of everything that's now happening, given the sheer volume of TV that's out there? Do you feel that pressure? How do you keep on top of everything? Francis, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, well, I don't know about Minori, but I've kind of had to make my peace with going, I can't watch everything. I think when I meet people or I say what my job is, so often I get the reaction of, wow, you get to sit around and watch TV all day. That must be amazing. And I think, yeah, I'd love that job. If you could point me in the direction of it, that'd be amazing. Because I actually don't really get any time in my work life to watch telly. So that means that, like everybody else, it's evenings, weekends, whenever you can. But that does mean you just cannot watch everything. So again, I rely on my colleagues who, obviously we all watch telly for a living, so I rely on recommendations from them, and also PRs as well, because they look after so many shows and have certain ones that they sort of can hone in on and direct us a little bit more to. So they'll say, here's our slate coming up for Q3. This is the one that we really think you should be looking at. So that can kind of help at least us and identify a little bit more the sort of priorities that are coming up streaming wise. But in terms of like a personal level, fitting everything in, it literally is impossible. So you just, so often I kind of watch 1 or 2 episodes of something, even if I'm really enjoying it, and then I just don't have time to finish it often. And so many shows are sort of half hanging there. I'm still only halfway through the first series of Succession, which is quite a personal shame, but I absolutely love it. Yeah, I still haven't finished it. So that's the story of my life, really.
I would say very much the same, to be honest. It's and as Frances sort of said, in terms of you do rely, public relations PRs become very much a lifeline and also gatekeepers for some of these programs, because you see them championing things very early to us, putting them on our radar. Sometimes as well, I think as journalists, we also need to be a little bit cognizant of the fact that that is happening, because there are obviously so many other shows that necessarily aren't being pushed. And so it's something I struggle with myself, because, we see the likes of, streaming platforms that have so many resources, obviously, to do that pushing. And something that I guess, I'm sure not just myself, a lot of reporters, we have to just keep in mind, how do we support the broadcast ecosystem in addition to streamers? How do we sort of remind ourselves, like, okay, like it's not necessarily an even playing field. So we also have to, up the sort of smaller shows from sometimes smaller shows, sometimes bigger shows, but from the terrestrial broadcasters, in addition to supporting, streaming players and US SVODs, basically. So it's quite tough. Like you sort of, you just, I think it's just kind of being aware of where it is you're getting your information from. And that's it's a really big struggle, I think, sometimes.
If I can just jump in there, I'm intrigued actually how Minori and Francis deal with the issue. They probably have to watch shows that they don't like and weren't targeted at them to do the job. And that must be hard, because I have the luxury of choosing not to watch things that fall into that category. But it must be hard if you have to do some of the shows which are just not you. So how do you deal with that?
Sometimes you can watch something objectively and just know that it's rubbish, and that obviously does happen, where you go, this doesn't appeal to me, it doesn't appeal to anyone, we can ignore this. But a lot of the time, from Radio Times perspective in particular, you kind of just, well, I do anyway, I put myself in the mindset of our demographic, our key reader, and I think you can personally not enjoy a program but yet see it's good and see it's got an audience. But yeah, there's a definite difference between watching something for pleasure and in your own time versus watching stuff for work.
I see that, because we obviously talk about television a lot, and I'm always conscious that there's shows like, I don't know, Gogglebox. I don't watch it, but I absolutely love it for what it did, for what it delivers advertisers, what it delivers the channel. So I've kind of come to recognise that I need to be excited and big up shows that I may not necessarily choose to watch because of their impact on the TV industries.
So thinking about how many shows are now in existence, they don't all live on one platform, they're spread across many. Is there a ceiling to the number of subscriptions or costs viewers can bear? I know what I will sometimes do is, if I'm aware a big release is coming out on Amazon, I might re-sign up to Amazon and maybe drop one of my other ones just to balance it out financially. So Nigel, are people having to make those decisions more and more?
Yes and no. And what we see lots of people doing what you're doing, being very judicious about which accounts they're keeping live, which accounts they're keeping high and low. We've heard the comments you just made about being swapping in around a big show launch. That comes up in consumer research quite a lot. It's interesting. We're in a period of disaggregation in a way. So there was a time where you either had pay TV or you didn't have pay TV, and pay TV covered everything, and not paying, you didn't get anything. And we're now in this kind of weird world where there's some people who say they don't pay for TV but have got 5 subscriptions for something which they don't count as pay TV. There's other people who have got a Sky or a Virgin subscription and also add on the extra bits. So it's very hard in this world to break out the audience into to kind of pay or don't pay anymore. But we do see people, as I say, in the last few years, we've seen people disaggregate. So they'll give up on a single pay TV subscription, but have 4 or 5 of these other services. But we're seeing the pay TV platforms try and entice them back by being better at the stuff we talked about at the beginning, better at aggregating all services, all content across all services into one place. So I do suspect that we're going to see some reaggregation of TV into a smaller number of bigger subscriptions where people can get some of the economies of scale. So it might be in the future that we don't necessarily all have 7 subscriptions to things. We bring it all back into a smaller number of bigger ones. So
I think there's some sort of some sort of skepticism, around new launches where you think surely, we can't take another one. You feel like we must be getting close to reaching saturation point, that just another streaming service can't actually make a success. And I felt a little bit of that when Disney Plus was first announced, because you think, well, if it's just the old Disney films, is that really going to appeal to people who don't have kids or a wide enough audience? And yet, just over a year, they've managed to knock up 86 million subscribers, and they've got incredible stuff in the pipeline now as well. They've got so many new TV series and films that are going straight to Disney Plus, maybe stuff that we would have traditionally been seeing going to the cinemas. So I think, we are potentially getting to a saturation point or a ceiling, but I do not think that we're there yet. And I think actually customers can still take on some extra streaming services, even from what we've got already.
I think just what I would say is basically they actually looked into this. There was a JD Power study that was done actually just end of last month, that found that, and keep in mind, this is a pandemic year, obviously, but that I believe the ceiling used to be 3, and it actually increased to 4. This is out of the US, but in terms of services that households would subscribe to. And I think the average household price, spend on VOD was $38 in April, and then was $47 in December. So once again, there is a COVID effect here in the sense that people are at home and they're watching. There's nothing else to do except watch TV. So they're obviously more. There's not, in terms of spending money, they're perhaps happy to dish out a little bit more for that extra VOD service. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of this changes once we come out of the pandemic, and to see the sort of consumer trends shift, because inevitably I'm assuming that they will. But I think what's really interesting is the battle for exclusivity that we're really going to see. Because if you take into consideration something like Disney Star launching, which is actually just launching in a few weeks, when they first launched, or when they first announced at least that they were launching, I noticed certain shows like Lost, for example, which, again, this is part of my deep dive into shows that I hadn't seen before, and I watched all of Lost basically on Amazon last summer. And I was, again, obsessed. But I saw that Lost was going to be on Disney Star. And Star is, by the way, so it'll be like the 6th tile on Disney Plus. And then when I contacted Amazon about it, Amazon confirmed that actually Lost will stay on that platform as well. So until that contract runs out. So I think what'll be really interesting is to see, what happens when Lost and shows like that, basically, especially some of those American programs that have really been the calling card for some services like Amazon Prime, I would say. Once they are all simply on one platform like Disney Star, then, because ultimately I think what it is as a consumer, you don't want to be paying for something on one platform that then is available on another. You're basically paying for the same, product on 2 different services. So I think once some of those output deals run out, I think that's really when we're going to see this sort of streaming battle heat up, certainly in places like Europe and internationally.
I think it was very clever of Disney So it was very clever of Disney. It was very clever of Disney to launch Disney Plus right at the beginning of the pandemic. We were all kind of talking about it when it first launched because there was nothing else to do but watch TV. So they got this high burst of subscriptions. But as the lockdown went on, we saw more and more people reporting research that they'd kind of drained it of all content. And we were worried at the time that they were going to start losing subscriptions as people just didn't renew after the first 3 months, having cleared it out of any content. So there's been a real impetus for them to come out with more, to sign up old content. So that I think they just brought the Muppets, the original Muppet series in, as well as bringing new stuff in. So initially it seemed really a great timing for them, but since then they've had to work really hard to keep their customers, I think.
And they absolutely needed Star. I mean, we were expecting them to launch Hulu internationally, obviously, in the last few years, and that's what Star is. But they absolutely need that adult. I mean, it in order to really grow and to cater to all sectors of the market, I think they really needed to roll out something that was a bit more adult oriented in themes. And obviously they'll have their appropriate parental controls. I mean, that's going to be extremely strict from what I gather, but it was very much in their, it was well timed. I think, I'm sure it was their longer strategy. We'll find out in Investor Day, I guess, this week, or sorry, the earnings.
Thinking about the relationship between streamers and audiences, let's take Netflix again, for example. So obviously Netflix's key business model is to add subscribers all the time. They constantly want to be adding to that number, and they do that by creating new shows, not adding new seasons to existing shows, which leads to cancellations. And as we've seen with the Society last year, Glow, there was a lot of outrage from the public and from critics as well. Are streamers like Netflix, are they risking damaging that bond between them and subscribers? Why would I begin watching this show if it's going to get axed after one season and I can't see how certain storylines play out? Francis, what are your thoughts on that?
I kind of feel like no matter where you start a series, if it's on public service broadcaster or on a streaming service, you're always running that risk that it could be cancelled, it might not be renewed. But I do think that when you start a show, if you go into episode 1 of The Queen's Gambit, you're not thinking ahead to the end of it thinking, oh, shall I bother watching this though, because it might not be renewed. And actually, if it's engaging enough and it's grabbed enough people, then more than likely it will be. But I personally think that there are so many great shows as well that have aired on the BBC, ITV, Channel 4. They've only run for 1 or 2 series and then they've been cancelled anyway. It's kind of the risk you run as a fan of a TV show, that it kind of could end at any moment. But at least I think it's been interesting to see sometimes when traditional broadcasters have cancelled a show, or something like The Last Kingdom, for example, which was a BBC Netflix co-production. The BBC, when they said we don't want it anymore, we're not going to fund it anymore, Netflix picked up the slack, and actually then it became a Netflix exclusive. Similar with Lucifer as well in the States, actually. So I do think that, again, being a fan of telly, you can really love a show like Glow, and it can just be kind of whipped away from you. And there's, no matter how many petitions you sign, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to come back again.
Yeah, we're still smarting 5 years later in our house from Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, not getting a second series. We were so emotionally invested in the characters and the storylines in that show, and for them to pull it was not recommission it was such a shock. It's still a big issue we talk about. I've got sons in their early 20s now, and we still talk about. Remember finding that out. I actually went to a dinner. A studio dinner with a bunch of American execs, and it had just been cancelled. And I was telling them how angry I was, by the way, what they'd done, and they were laughing. And there was another show that we were watching at the time, and we were 11 episodes into series 1, which had 13 episodes. And I said to the guy, and I jokingly, "And don't you dare pull this one." And he said, "Oh," he said, "No, we've done that already." He said, "You'll see when you get to episode 13, we never really worked out how to resolve it, so we just killed the second series." And I sat there kind of stunned. We were 11 episodes into this thing, second thing we'd invested all this time with, and they had just pulled it. So it's damaging. We're hurting people as an industry. We've got to stop this.
I personally don't think that audiences are cynical. I mean, I think they're pretty cynical, but I don't think that they're that cynical to the point where, you know, they're. However, to be fair, I think that's why we're sort of seeing some streamers basically very quickly announce season twos, and maybe sometimes even seasons 2 and 3. Like very early on in the process, I think, and that's basically to give some reassurance to viewers that, hey, they're you know, this show has a life after season 1. You know, that's our commitment basically. So that's you know, that's a very clever tactic. Obviously they, you know, they're seeing, they may have, obviously most of the time that means that they've made that investment early on, but you're seeing, I guess, increasingly I'm beginning to see certain streamers like Netflix, for example, where, you know, a show like Lupin has just been on the platform for a couple of weeks and they're coming out and saying, oh, the projected 28 day is going to be 70 million. And so they're sort of building, but and of course who are we to know, because they'll never really release their numbers. So for all we know, you know, but if we're obviously taking them at their word, that's a huge number, and you instantly think, oh wow, that's going to be their biggest non-English language show to date. I should watch that. And so then you get hooked, and then a week later, basically, it's like, oh, and it's coming back for, you know, season 2 in the summer. So, you know, okay, if I invest in the show even a little bit, there is more to come, just a few months away. So I have been noticing that sort of trend a little bit more, where I think some of these broadcasters and streamers are trying to get ahead of the fatigue, I suppose, among audiences.
Francis, you mentioned co-productions earlier, and there have been so many shows. I May Destroy You was an HBO BBC co-production. It's a Sin, also HBO, and Channel 4. Is that the future, because streamers have such deep pockets? You know, there's talk of the Lord of the Rings series coming to Amazon, which is a $1 billion show, which is just insane. I can't wrap my head around that. But is that the future? We're going to be seeing more and more of that going forward?
I know, as you say, Lord of the Rings, if and when we get to see it, and it'll be the most expensive TV show in history. $1 billion, as you say, it's just phenomenal, isn't it? And you know, if you're the BBC or ITV, where are you going to find £1 billion to make your equivalent? It's just not going to happen. So, you know, there are such advantages for both the public service broadcasters and streamers to team up, really. You know, for someone like Netflix, obviously teaming up with the BBC. The BBC is seen around the world as quite a sort of seal of quality and stamp of approval. So for them to have the BBC on board initially, that's great. And again, BBC benefit from having the deep pockets of a streamer. And also, you know, again, there's so many rights issues, but often it will mean that, for example, the BBC will get to air it first in this country, and there'll be a bit of a lag before it will go up on Netflix here. And yet there's different distribution rights, and Netflix can air it far quicker around the rest of the world. So, you know, it's interesting to kind of, I think this will be something that we've seen a lot of it already, but I think it will just continue to grow, especially because budgets are shrinking and they're only going to get smaller, at least in the foreseeable future, due to COVID. So yeah, co-pros are the way forward, I think, for both streamers and PSBs.
I think that one of the jobs that the streamers have done is to bring institutionalized finance into TV production outside of America. And it was always interesting, you know, how programs were funded in the past, because in America, obviously, the big network companies were able to bring big structured finance from the capital markets into television in a way that just didn't really happen outside of America. And so budgets were always much smaller, and most television was made predominantly locally for local markets. The streamers have brought globalization into TV production, and they brought big structured money into TV. So for the first time, you know, in UK production, the co-pro system is allowing UK production houses to tap into institutionalized money. You know, the stock market is pouring money via the streamers into smaller production companies to make these programs, and they've been de-risked in doing that, because the streamers come with a global distribution system already mapped out, whereas before you had to make a show and work it through the international distribution systems, turn up at MIFIM in Cannes and hope to flog it to various broadcasters. So they brought institutionalized money, they brought an established global distribution network, which de-risks the programming and the commissioning, which is brilliant, but it has changed television. You know, television is increasingly a global market. not a set of national markets that coordinate every now and then. So it's culturally a big change.
Nigel, this is one for you. Why hasn't technology caught up? Why isn't it helping us out more when we're browsing apps and deciding what to watch? What does the future look like? What changes are we going to be seeing?
The most obvious place where all the changes are going to happen are in the interfaces we use. So, you know, and I think we shouldn't we shouldn't discount how much change has happened. If you look at an interface on something like Sky Q, the new version 360 system, or even, you know, Amazon Fire OS, the amount of tech innovation that's come slamming into TV in the last 10 years is profound. The fact that we very nonchalantly have adopted voice searching for television programs, whether you've got Apple TV, Amazon Fire, whether you've got Sky Q, or whether you've got Version 360, they've all got voice search built in. Had you said to me 10 years ago, we'll be voice searching for TV, I'd have laughed. You know, that was sci-fi. But now, you know, we've adopted new search and recommendation techniques. We're beginning to adopt data. TV's been reasonably slow in adopting data to give recommendations. And obviously, again, the industry's been given the hurry up by Virgin and by Amazon, by Amazon and by Netflix on that. But, you know, now we've got data, we're building recommendations. There are some hurdles to television adopting tech and innovation as quickly as the web industries and the mobile phone industries can. A lot of that comes from the fact that a huge amount of TV is still audience-based. We're still watched by more than one person sitting back with a shared device. And sometimes it can be harder to introduce tech on big shared devices than it can, you know, for a device that sits in our pocket. But TV is catching up rapidly. And as I say, we're things like high-spec audio has been built into the TV experience now, whereas before it was very much a kind of a luxury item. So we shouldn't discount quite how much tech, as I say, has come slamming into the TV experience. And there's still more coming down the track. I suspect in 5 years' time, TV interfaces, functionality, our ability to merge accounts, our ability to manage audience versus user, all those things are still yet to be resolved. But it's an exciting time.
Yeah, the landscape is unrecognizable as to, you know, what it was a few years ago, and I'm sure it will continue to change. We've mentioned COVID a few times. Minori, obviously, you know, we've seen a lot of TV shows that have been delayed. Things like Sex Education, which usually comes out in January. We haven't seen that yet. How is that going to impact TV production moving forward? Are we going to see fewer shows? Are we going to see smaller productions? What's it going to look like, bearing in mind what productions have had to deal with over the past year?
Yeah, absolutely. I really do think it's going to have a pretty major impact in terms of the next year or two of programming, just because, you know, we're seeing, I think everybody on this kind of assembly line is impacted. Like, you know, writers, for example, have to, you know, I'm hearing that people are, it's quite common now to retool. You know, if you had like 8 episodes, it becomes 6, and that's because of so many things. It's costs, but also availability of talent. I mean, you know, I think that, and we knew this at the very beginning. Everybody was sort of saying, oh wow, how is it going to work with talent? And now we're sort of starting to see that, where you know, key actors, key directors, you know, people are afraid to travel. They want to spend more time with their families. They're pulling out of projects. You know, we saw, like, for example, Keira Knightley, you know, stepping out of something like the Essex Serpent for Apple TV Plus. I thought that was quite a statement, where she had family obligations, stepping out of this role. Someone else comes in. And all of that is going to change, you know, what we're viewing. I mean, obviously things will be recast, but in terms of to your question, yeah, I think episode orders will definitely be constricted for certain types of shows. You know, there'll be perhaps less of that, you know, the glamorous international locales that we saw for certain kinds of programs. They'll look a bit more locally in terms of storylines. They'll be a bit more inward facing, perhaps more in the home, and, you know, a lot of maybe relationship driven dramas, which I personally have always preferred. So I'm not complaining, but certainly in terms of some of those key characteristics of high end TV that we've all gotten used to for so long, I think certainly things will definitely have to change. The good news, obviously, is this vaccine is being in places like the UK. Obviously, that's very good news for the industry, because it will certainly, I think the production community will keep adhering to the strict COVID guidelines that they've been operating on. But there is that added relief and security with the vaccine. So hopefully it won't be too long before things get back to normal, but for sure, I think for the next year, at the minimum, we're going to see an effect in the output.
Francis, would you echo that? Do you think things are going to change drastically moving forwards, or do you think it's a case of finding our feet, and then once things settle down, full steam ahead, off we go again?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, sort of the Netflix co-CEO Reed Hastings, I think he said that he wants to see more Netflix originals this year than before, really. Which you think, God, how can these productions just ramp up so much when we're all so constrained still with life? But I guess as Minori says, the vaccine's coming. I think that's going to open up things a lot more. But creating productions now in the middle of this pandemic, it's created so many problems in terms of if you get a positive case, the whole production has to be shut down for many weeks. Everyone has to go into self-isolation. The cost of daily testing. I mean, if you look at how expensive COVID tests are, that all gets added onto the cost. So I think especially for the more traditional broadcasters who are seeing, budgets squeezed all the time. You don't need to look far in the press to see the BBC always cutting costs, but also ITV. They've had such a huge hit to their ad revenue last year that they're going to be suffering as well. So the streamers do have the advantage of, again, the deeper pockets to pick up the cost of the increased cost of TV production in the immediate future. But I think like we all are kind of hoping that life will go back to normal at some point in the very near future, and when it does, hopefully TV production will follow suit as well.
I'm hoping we bring something out of this as well. What I haven't seen much of yet is new formats coming out specifically because of the constraints. I was thinking of the Martin Sheen, David Tennant thing, Staged, which was filmed under lockdown, pretty much on a kind of on their phones almost. And what I liked about it, apart from that it was good fun, was that it was a format that had been created specifically to deal with the constraints. And I'd quite like to see some learnings coming out of this, and not just necessarily everyone go back to business as usual. We have to be able to pull some breakthroughs as well. So some things that we do differently in the future because of this.
Although if I see another panel show or a chat show done via Zoom, I'll be happy to not see any of those ever again. So let's not let that be a permanent change.
+1. Yeah, I completely agree. I can't take it anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And also, hopefully, it will benefit more localized productions as well, rather than jetting off to the other side of the world. Film on your doorstep, which is a great thing as well. And I'm very aware of the time that we're almost coming to the end, and we do have a couple of questions that have been sent in. How much do you think US and UK tastes in narrative and style are dominating TV production? Is there room for, say, Russian or Japanese narrative styles to get a non-national audience on a global service on demand? Minori, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course. Actually, that was one of the points that I was hoping to make as well. In terms of, I guess, in recent months, particularly, just HBO Max, Warner Media's streaming service, is one example where, my goodness, in the fall we just saw them picking up, left, right, and center, a lot of international programs, non-English language, particularly, where you wouldn't necessarily have seen that a year ago, but obviously, but now, there's a few different things. HBO Max, they need content too. The time at which they launched was not, amid the pandemic with production shut down. Ultimately, they do need content, but it's interesting that they are going for some of these, non-English language programs, amazing shows from all over the world. And we've seen shows like Gomorrah, for example, which is this great Sky Italia crime drama finally make its way to the US. And so I think that there is a broadening of taste, certainly in America, where some, and we've seen that for the last few years, but it's certainly accelerated from my perspective in pandemic times, where those networks, they need content, and they're just finally looking overseas for shows. And so I think in terms of the next Japanese show, the next big Japanese drama, or certainly, well, Korean titles we've seen for quite a long time have a certain kind of prominence, but certainly for international drama, this is a very, very good time. If you have certain pieces of IP that are just very, very high end, that have sort of universal themes, I would definitely be, those distributors, you can bet are flogging those shows hard to some of the US, certainly streamers, potentially some broadcast players as well, but definitely the streamers. There's interest where there simply wasn't before.
Francis, have you watched any foreign titles recently that you'd recommend that have really caught your eye? Potentially that you perhaps wouldn't have, but you just had so much more time on your hands, you thought, I'll dive straight in.
Do you know what? I'm again going to show myself up here and say they're on my list. And if I had £1 for every time I say, oh, it's on my list, I'll get round to it, I would be very rich. But Lupin and Call My Agent, I mean, the amount of people who have said you've got to watch this, and I go, oh, I will, I promise, after I've finished RuPaul's Drag Race, I promise I will get round to it. But yeah, no, I definitely want to see both of those, just because, again, there's been so much chat about them, and French TV seems to be having real moments. So yeah, I recommend those vicariously.
Yeah, Lupin or Lupin, it just
Lupin,
so much fun. Omar Sy as the lead is just so charismatic. He's brilliant. I couldn't take my eyes off him. And Nigel, how do you feel about the selection of foreign language titles that are starting to creep in there and get the praise and attention that they deserve?
Yeah, no, we're big fans in our house. My family are watching Lupin, but they got 2 episodes in without me, so I had to play catch up on that one. The French agency one, I keep calling it Deeper Son. The what's it called? The PR agency, you just mentioned it, Francis. Sorry.
Call My Agent.
Call My Agent. Sorry, yeah, I had a brain, but we absolutely love that. So we're mad for that. So we're into the end of series 2 on that. So yeah, French cinema has kind of popped up. There is the guy who's in Lupin is also in a film called Untouchables, Untouchable, which is absolutely brilliant, beautiful film, shot in Paris as well. And even my old man sent me a note to say, you've got to watch Spiral, which I think is known in French. It's engagé. It's gears, I think you call it in French. But Spiral is another really gritty Parisian drama. Absolutely love that. And just if I can make just one or 2 Ponzi references. My kids study movies, so they are mad for the Japanese movies, and always have been. The Studio Ghibli stuff gets played all the time in our house. So if you're looking for just beautiful escapism foreign films, the Studio Ghibli stuff like Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle are big. And I would make one kind of thing throw in there, which is Iranian short films. For some reason over lockdown, I've got addicted to these just unbelievable short films coming out of Iran. And there's one called Poem of Havaz, which is just very short. It's about a man driving to a cemetery. I won't tell you more. It's on YouTube. Poem of Havaz. Just amazing. So I'm all for it. One of the upsides of too much TV and the supply of it is we're getting to see all this great stuff that previously would have been hard for us to find and hard for us to enjoy. So it's a good thing. So thumbs up from the Wally household.
Big thumbs up. Yeah, some cracking recommendations there. We are about to wrap up any minute now, but just very quickly from all 3 of you, what shows have really caught your eye at the moment? What are you recommending to all of your family and friends? Minori, do you want to start?
I think I mentioned it before, but I would say The Serpent has really, I thought it was very, very great production values and some slightly questionable casting, I think, but overall, really, really well done.
Yeah, and I've echo actually. The Serpent is fantastic. I just mentioned it. RuPaul's Drag Race, big fan. Can't get enough of that at the moment. Succession as well, which I'm still working my way through. And I have to say, I'm sorry, Minori, Emily in Paris. Again, I'm kind of near the end of that. And every episode I go, oh, this is terrible. I'll just watch the next one.
Fair enough.
I don't want to watch Emily in Paris. I want Minori in London. So we're going to watch the biopic, Minori in London. When that hits the screen, it'll be huge.
I'm optioning the rights.
Yeah, Francis, echo exactly what you said about Emily in Paris. I will die on this hill. I enjoyed every second. It was like a whole bag of pick and mix that I couldn't stop dipping into. I'm currently working my way through Better Call Saul, which is just a phenomenal piece of television. If you haven't done it, watch Breaking Bad and then go back and just dive straight in, because it's absolutely fantastic. So we are almost out of time, and that concludes this panel, sadly. But thank you to all of you watching at home. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did, and thank you very much to Minori, Francis, and Nigel for sharing all of their insight and knowledge with us this afternoon. You are the fountain of all TV knowledge. Thank you to Philip and Damien for producing. And if you want to revisit anything that we have spoken about today, it's going to be on YouTube, so you can tune back in. We do have a couple of RTS London events coming up very soon. We've got one in a couple of weeks. TikTok Famous, how TV can leverage TikTok. I don't know much about TikTok myself, so I'll be tuning into that. And one that hasn't been formally announced yet, but is coming up, Deutschland 89 Behind the Wall. So that's going to be on Tuesday, March the 9th. So you can book that right now. And that's it. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you for watching, and hopefully see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.